Elizabeth Voss, editor-in-chief of Disobedient Media, and I'm here to bring you another one of our articles today. It was published on May 3rd, 2017, and it was titled The Spirit Cooking Style Cult Accused of Murder and Shamanism in South Korea's Government. And it was a really important story, and it's really important background for the latest article on this subject that I published. So I'll just start reading. On April 16th, 2014, the Sewol ferry disaster took place off the coast of South Korea, leaving over 300 people dead, most of whom were high school students on a school trip. In the aftermath of the Sewol's sinking, lingering questions surrounding the disaster caused massive public outrage amidst reports of mishandled rescue efforts, while President Park Geun-hye was inexplicably missing for a staggering 7 hours during the disaster. The absence spawned accusations of impropriety based on previously existing suspicions about a South Korean cult to which Park was tied. The Sewol disaster formed part of the public impetus for unprecedented protests and the unraveling of a major corruption scandal, in South Korea that ultimately led to Park's undoing in 2016, so 2 years after the Sewol ferry disaster. And I apologize if I am a little bit hard to understand today. I'm slightly sick, but we'll just get through this. The Sewol sinking was fraught with negligence and improper responses from its crew from the moment the ferry began to experience issues. Videos recovered from the event showed students in the ferry as it capsized, as it sank. And it showed that the ferry PA system was broadcasting instructions that told the students to stay in their cabins as the ship capsized. Most of the children obeyed this instruction, and I believe one of the hyperlinks that I have in the article is to an important documentary on the Sewol disaster, and I believe it's titled "The Truth Will Not Sink with Sewol." So if you're interested in more about that, I encourage you to look up the documentary "The Truth Will Not Sink with Sewol." And it's an absolutely horrifying documentary, horrifying footage, but it shows very clearly the students with the PA system playing, telling them to not leave the cabins, to not move, as the water is rising in their compartments. It's completely devastating, but it is important background for the rest of what we're going to talk about in this article. So public outrage grew, understandably, after survivors reported that the Coast Guard also did very little to intervene. Passengers who inflated their life vests inside the compartments were prevented from escaping as water began to rise. And again, stepping away from the article for a second, if you do watch the documentary, The Truth Will Not Sink with Sewol, you will see the children helping each other put on their life vests in their compartments. And the thing is about that if you put on and inflate life vests, if you inflate them while you're still in the ship, you will be unable to then, duck under doors. You can't escape. It's a death sentence, and that's exactly what happened in many cases. So passengers who inflated their life vests inside the compartments were prevented from escaping as water began to rise. Divers recovering remains from the seawall were actually forced to cut the vests away before victims could be removed from the wreck. And in the article, I've included an image of the seawall. It has it's the underside of the ferry, rising up out of the water with divers nearby. And then Reuters reported that most of the bodies found in the last 2 days, which is, that's a time-dated reference to just after the ferry had gone down. Most of the bodies found had broken fingers from the victims frantically attempting to climb the walls or floors to escape as the ship went down again. So meanwhile, the captain and most of the vessel's crew walked away from the disaster unharmed. Captain Lee Jun-seok was later sentenced to 36 years in prison for gross negligence. CNN noted that Jun-seok must have known as he got off the seawall that hundreds of other passengers, most of them children, were still inside following instructions to stay put. President Park Geun-hye's whereabouts were unknown during 7 crucial hours of the day of the Sewol disaster. A spokesman for South Korea's presidential Blue House, which, as I understand it, is the equivalent of the United States White House, insisted to Reuters that she had been receiving reports about the Sewol incident all throughout the day and gave instructions either by phone or written reports. But the mysterious gap in the record was officially investigated by the South Korean parliament, and after those hearings, the president's explanation was dismissed as insufficient. Despite numerous parliamentary hearings, South Korean authorities still have been unable to determine Park Geun-hye's whereabouts on the day of the tragedy. I mean, can you imagine if the president had been just gone and missing for 7 hours during the day of a major disaster, like something like 9/11 or some other massive school shooting or anything like that? Park's activity during these 7 missing hours continued to be the cause of public speculation in South Korea. Theories explaining her absence included speculation about strange medical and aesthetic procedures, all of which Park denied. Reuters confirmed that Park had previously received injections from a Dr. Kim Sang-min, which were, quote, this is Reuters, quoting Reuters, they said it was derived from human placenta. And although Park denied that she underwent such treatments, Dr. Sang-min also practiced at Charm Clinic, and Business Insider reported that another Charm doctor had fabricated records to show that that Choi Soon-sil had visited the clinic, where in fact it had been Park Geun-hye that visited. And the reason that's an issue in South Korea is that the president, during their term, has an official doctor, like an official government-provided doctor, and that the theory was that she was basically visiting this clinic for off-the-record procedures of whatever variety, either because she had an illness that she wanted to keep hidden, or because she wanted to get sort of like aesthetic, procedures done that she didn't want on the official government record. So that type of issue was what was at play here. One of Park's nurses, Cho Yo-ok, was sent on what was called an unusual trip to an American military base in Texas. The nurse was reported to have been present on the day of the Sewol disaster and would have been qualified to testify about any medical treatments that Park may have undergone. That Cho Yo-ok suddenly departed for the U.S. drew public speculation that the South Korean military had sent Cho to the United States specifically to shield her from questions that would prove damaging to Park's reputation, and led to claims from South Korean lawmakers. This is not the press. This is not the public making a speculative statement. This is claims from South Korean lawmakers that the U.S. military was actively helping to protect this nurse in order to protect Park. So remaining confusion as to Park's whereabouts during the sinking of the Sewol fueled suspicion surrounding the seriously botched rescue efforts, and questions simmered for years in regards to Park's close advisor Choi Soon-sil and her relationship to Park Geun-hye. Choi's father, Choi Tae-min, had developed a close bond with the president after her mother's death. A WikiLeaks diplomatic cable from 2007 referred to rumors among the South Korean public that Choi Tae-min was a Rasputin-type figure with complete control over Park's body and soul during her formative years, and that is a quote from the US diplomatic cable published by WikiLeaks. And there are two things to note from that. The first is that the fact that there were these rumors that this individual, who was Choi Soon-sil's father, had this Rasputin-like relationship with Park Geun-hye. The second, and I think the most important thing about this, is not that. It's actually the date. It's the fact that it's in 2007 that a US diplomatic cable is actually discussing these rumors and this public opinion of Choi's relationship, not even to Choi Soon-sil, but to her father. So the fact that you have this type of controversy surrounding Park Geun-hye as far back as 2007, to the point that the US diplomatic cable is discussing it as a part of their understanding of South Korean politics, is, I think, really, really important, because it shows how far back this issue went. It's, obviously predating the Sewol disaster by a number of years. The New York Times also reported that in 2016 that Mr. Choi, again, Choi Soon-sil's father, was the founder of an obscure sect based on Buddhism, Christianity, and Chondogyo. I apologize if that's incorrect pronunciation. And the church was called the Church of Eternal Life. And that he befriended Park Geun-hye, who was 40 years younger than him, soon after her mother was assassinated in 1974. And obviously that's a very long time ago. She was very young at the time. Media reports stated that after Choi Tae-min's death in 1994, his daughter, Choi Soon-sil, became a close advisor for Park, and that during this time, there were rumors, which were denied by the president, of shamanistic rituals being performed in the Blue House. Korean news outlets revealed that Soon-sil exercised extreme levels of control over Park to the extent that she was dictating the president's own policy. So first, in 2007, you have the discussion of Choi Soon-sil's father, Choi Tae-min, having a Rasputin-like influence over Park Geun-hye. Then later, you have news outlets talking about Choi Soon-sil, the daughter of this religious leader, exercising also, again, extreme levels of control over Park Geun-hye. And I also want to mention here, and I believe I discussed it in my other article, the one that I made a video of yesterday, that it wasn't actually just Choi Soon-sil that was involved in this scandal. Choi Soon-sil is the most visible individual involved, but if you go back to the really early reports on this subject, it was actually a group of individuals. It was, I believe, 8 advisors that were involved in this alleged cult that was involved in basically controlling Park Geun-hye, from what South Korean reports stated. And even, CNN and Reuters and some other, I believe like the AP reported on that, or in the early days of this scandal unfolding. But very quickly after the scandal became known, and I'm referring to the 2016 eruption of this scandal, very quickly after it kind of erupted, the reports zoomed in on Choi Soon-sil individually, and it sort of makes this image of her being the only person that was influencing Park, when, as far as I understand it, there were a number of people that were involved in this. But obviously Choi Soon-sil has this relationship with Choi Tae-min, her father, and it's a lot easier just to kind of condense it down into that one person. But despite official denials, there was a clear pattern of official acceptance of shamanism during Park's presidency. In 2016, Korean papers reported that shamanistic ritual sacrifices of animals were performed in the National Assembly proceeding hall where South Korea's legislature convenes. The ceremony was attended, reportedly, by over 200 people, including politicians, supermodels, doctors, and shamanistic practitioners. It drew the ire of Korean pastors and theological teachers, who condemned the National Assembly's apparent official endorsement of the event. The Korea Times also noted that the public was increasingly interpreting official events and presidential remarks in religious terminology. They were seeing it as symbolic, and they were reading into it in that way. After the sinking of the seawall, South Korean media also speculated that the incident had been intentional and meant to mark the 20th anniversary of the death of Choi Tae-min, which fell near the date of the Sewol Disaster. And I want to add that the Korean media that I'm citing on that statement is the Korea Times. And the article in question is titled "Suspicions Re-emerge Over 7 Missing Hours." And it describes some saying, and this is a quote from them, I'm going to read you this quote. Quote, "Suspicions and rumors link Choi with the unknown whereabouts of Park, with some saying the accident was related to a sacrificial ritual. The president was absent during the crucial first 7 hours of the ferry's sinking, which killed more than 300 passengers on board, mostly high school students on a school excursion." And then I'm just skimming this really fast to see if there's anything else that you would find interesting. Okay, at the time of the Sewol disaster, and this is quoting, there were rumors that the president had been with her former aide, Chung Geun-hye, who was Choi's former husband. Choi was barely known to the public at that time. And with the Choi scandal emerging in 2016, new rumors are spreading now that Park was with Chung, but for different purposes related to Choi's father. And then it goes into the relationship I've described to you, with Choi Tae-min being the founder of a fringe religious group called the Church of Eternal Life, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not trying to read this entire article to you. I'm just trying to illustrate to anyone that thinks that I'm somehow, making up ridiculous statements. This is from the Korea Times. This is them describing those rumors and those exact allegations that I'm describing to you. So when I say the Korean media indicated the incident had been intentional, meant to mark the 20th anniversary of the death of Choi Tae-min, that's exactly what they've said. And that fell near the date of the Sewol disaster. And Al Jazeera reported as well that Park was actually forced to deny, and this is a quote from them, forced to deny rumors that she was participating in a ritual to mark the anniversary of the death of Choi Tae-min, and who was the founder of a Christian sect to which she had ties. So this is a well-documented issue that came up in relation to the Sewol disaster. The Korea Times also described claims that the accident was related, again, and in this particular segment of the article, I'm quoting directly what I just read to you, which is the Korea Times described claims that the accident was related to a sacrificial ritual and the victims were offerings. So controversial were the accusations against Park and Choi Soon-sil that practitioners of shamanism in South Korea claimed their reputations were being tarnished by the scandal, which I think is understandable. In the article, I include a picture of a South Korean shaman in the midst of practice, and the image itself is sourced from an article that is reporting on South Korean shamanistic practitioners and their anger towards both Choi Soon-sil and Park Geun-hye, because they felt that their reputations were being sullied by the scandal. Adding to questions surrounding the disaster were revelations that the owner of the seawall was South Korean billionaire Yoo Byung-un, known colloquially as the millionaire with no face. Yoo had co-founded an obscure sect, sometimes referred to as a cult, which had connections to a 1987 mass suicide, and according to the New York Times, Yoo was arrested after the deaths of 32 members of a splinter group. They were found dead in the attic of a factory cafeteria in 1987. Some of them had been hung, and when authorities attempted to question Yoo in relation to the sinking of the seawall, he disappeared, leading authorities on a weeks-long manhunt before his decomposed body was found in an orchard. I've, included multiple citations in that paragraph, and I just want to point out for one moment that, again, this is not some random billionaire or millionaire in South Korea. This is the millionaire that happened to own the Sewol ferry, which then sank. It is quite amazing to me that the same owner was also, who disappeared and died before he could be interviewed by authorities, was the founder, had co-founded a cult that was connected to a mass suicide for which he was arrested. So, over 2 years later, corruption allegations emerged regarding President Park and her now extremely unpopular advisor, Choi Soon-sil. Massive protests broke out in 2016, motivated in part by rage that was spurred by the Sewol disaster. As Disobedient media previously reported, the string of scandals resulted in up to 1.5 million South Koreans taking to the streets for weeks of protests that ultimately ended Park's presidency in 2017 and led to her arrest, as well as corruption charges for both Choi Soon-sil and the heir to the corporate giant Samsung. And although that heir, and that's the end of the article, and I want to add, because of recent developments, although that same heir has been released due to having been given a suspended sentence during his appeals process, he did serve a year in jail, and in my opinion that is groundbreaking because he was the heir to Samsung, which is responsible for 1/5, 20% of South Korea's economy. So the fact that this scandal was serious enough to lead a president, the heir of a giant corporate producer of a fifth of a nation's economy, and the president's advisor, to have all those people arrested and jailed and to face actual charges, is so diametrically different to what we see in the US and in the West when corruption is exposed. We just seem to, expose the corruption and go right along as if nothing happened. And so I think it's really instructive for the US and the West and Western audiences to hear that there can be a different outcome in these situations. So, with that said, that's all that's in the article, and thank you for listening, even though I'm kind of sick and congested. I hope you could understand what I said. I'm attempting to deal with the audio issues the best that I can, and I really appreciate all of your support as I've been, creating these videos and kind of learning in front of you all how to make them more readable and understandable, and the audio a little bit better, I hope. And I am on Twitter at Elizabeth Lee Voss. Disobedient Media is on Twitter at Disobedient News. You can find me on Steemit, and you can also, if you want to, you can donate to my Patreon at Elizabeth Lee Voss. And again, that is not something that I'm trying to push on people. If you would like to help out financially, that's great. But also, liking, sharing, retweeting, posting on Reddit, posting wherever is absolutely just as helpful and just as important. Every single time that a supporter does that, it actively acts against the censorship that has been so strong lately against independent media of all varieties, whether it's me or H.A. Goodman or Caitlin Johnstone or Lee Camp or Susie Dawson, any of us. We're all facing a huge amount of censorship right now. So thank you for all of your support in sharing these articles and these videos around. I really appreciate it, and I will be back next time to read you another article. Thank you so much. Bye.